Okay. Name, please?
Francis Farley.
Perfect. Where were you born?
I was born in Lowell, Massachusetts in 1928.
Gotcha. What was your childhood like?
I was born just at the beginning of the Depression, so there wasn't much money available. My father worked in the mills, and we grew up in the middle of a city. Lowell was a rather poor section of the country at that time, and we went to a Catholic school which was right next door, and I lived there until I was about 16 years old. I went to a high school right in Lowell, and during my childhood it was a lot of fun. It was a little bit different from what we see now with most of the kids living in the suburbs. We lived right downtown Lowell, and it was fun because most of our friends were within a city block of us. So there was always somebody around who was going to play ball or do something like having parties, having house parties and that kind of thing. And we never needed transportation of any kind because all of our friends lived within a mile of each other. And it was a tough time going through that because, as I said, we just didn't have any money at all. Then the war came along in the 1930s, and that kind of changed everything. My father got a better job because of the war effort, and so in the early 40s we had a little more money available to us, and felt that we could go and buy things rather than always go on to these war offices where they had all kinds of rationing stamps and that kind of thing.
Did you always want to join the military?
No, I had no desire at all to join the military. I was very fortunate because of my age, I was in between the two wars. But in June of 1945, when the Second World War ended, I had just turned 17, was just eligible for the draft at that time, and since the war ended, I didn't have to go into the military service. I worked and went to school for several years, and then the draft was reinitiated. But by that time, the Korean conflict was drawing to a close by the time they got around to drafting me. So I was in between, and even though I spent 2 years in the Army, there was actually no fighting going on. So I was very fortunate in that way.
Nice. Where did you enter boot camp?
I went to Fort Ord, California. I happened to be on the West Coast at the time, so they sent me down there. And I was fortunate. I went in August of '54, so the weather was fantastic. We did a lot of activities outside, as you would imagine, in the service, and it's always nice to have good weather, as we had down in Fort Ord, which is between Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Yep. How long were you there for? 2 weeks?
I was there for 2 8-week periods. I went through a boot camp, which was mostly outside, learning how to handle military weapons, mostly. Something that was interesting and kind of fascinating, but nothing that I would want to do for a lifetime. We learned how to fire rifles and machine guns and anti-tank weapons and throw hand grenades around and that kind of thing. So, as I say, it was kind of fascinating. After 8 weeks of that, I went to something called clerk typist school, and that was to learn the Army procedures for working in an office. And remember one of the sergeants who taught typing who knew absolutely nothing about typing, but he could handle a stopwatch. And he would say, go, and he would time us for 30 seconds and say, stop. And wait 15 seconds, and he'd say, go, and then stop again. And that was our training. That's the way we learned how to type. Nobody ever corrected anything, but I guess we learned speed. We didn't learn accuracy, but we did learn speed. After 8 weeks of that type of training, it was around Christmas time, and we were occupying Japan at the time. As you found out as you read your history books, one of the big things that the United States did that was fantastic was rebuild both Germany and Japan, because we had pretty much destroyed those two countries. And so I was sent to Japan in January of 1955 as part of the occupation force. On my way over to Japan, as they reviewed records and so forth, they found out I had already had a couple of years of college, and so I was assigned to the finance corps. And even though I had no business training whatsoever, but that turned out to be a very good assignment, and I did that for most of 1955 and then about 3 months in 1956. This meant I was working in an office, and as the soldiers came back from Korea for R&R, rest and relaxation, they would come to our camp, which had all of the facilities for them to relax. And we took care of all the pay records and made sure they had enough money to spend so that they were comfortable. Then after about 14 months, my mother got very ill, and so the Red Cross was able to get me transferred back to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And so I came back to Fort Devens for 3 months, doing the same work. I was assigned to the finance corps again. And they had what they called early release. If you wanted to go to college, they would let you out 3 to 4 months ahead of time. So I applied for that since I already had a couple of years of college. And so I got out in June of 1956 and went to Merrimack College to finish up. So that was, as far as the military life, we were in a very good situation. The only soldiering thing I had to do was to go out every Wednesday morning and fire a pistol, a .45 handgun, and also a rifle. But there were no other field exercises for us because we were supposed to be working in the office and taking care of all the payrolls, and we didn't want those to be late, so they never sent us out on any kind of maneuvers. The closest I came to combat was in 1956. The situation in Formosa, which is now Taipei, got a little bit nasty, and so one morning they woke us up around 3 o'clock in the morning, put us on trucks and brought us down to some ships, and said that we were going to go over to Formosa, and because there was a danger of mainland China invading Formosa. So they put us on the ship, but in mid-afternoon we disembarked again and went back to our original station at Camp Otsu. So I never really had any confrontation, was never in actual combat, but did get a little bit of the feeling of what is it all about when you feel that you're going into a situation that's very dangerous. And I still remember as we were in the back of the trucks going out to the harbor,